Hello chess friends and welcome to Decisive Chess channel and welcome back to the World Chess Championship in 2021. So we're following now of course this tough battle between the World Chess Champion Magnus Carlsen and young Nepomniachtchi. We all know what happened in the last couple of rounds because Magnus Carlsen took now finally a decisive lead. He has now comfortable 2-point lead in front of Nepo. We have to really say it, I think the result is more a result of Nepo's mistakes than maybe maybe Magnus Carlsen's brilliant play, because also in the round 8 I think Nepo made the decisive mistake, eventually lost too many pawns on the board, and of course Magnus Carlsen punishes these types of endgames, and Magnus Carlsen won the game very easily, very effectively. So we're now in the round 9. As we said, Nepo has to make some changes, and Nepo did them because Nepo didn't play e4 in this particular game. Nepo changed a little bit the opening theory because I think he had to spice up the game somehow. So today he played the move c4, which is now the most imbalanced first move that you can play in an early stage of the game. So now maybe Nepo is hoping for some e5 lines, then to go maybe into asymmetrical pawn structure. So when that happens, of course, when we have an asymmetrical pawn structure, then of course many things can happen when it comes to tactics. But okay, here Magnus is already saying I'm going into normal structures. I'm hoping here that you play maybe the move d4, and then after move d5 I can go into the normal queen's gambit decline. But here Nepo plays the move g3, which is now sort of a Catalan setup. The Catalan we have seen many times now in this World Chess Championship match. From Magnus' perspective, Magnus played the Catalan with the white pieces. Now after move g3, here we have d5 by Magnus, we have bishop to g2, and now comes the move d4. We have now the so-called Ng4 defense. So the Ng4 defense is sort of a reversed Benoni structure, where now we can expect in the near future some ideas of knight to c6 and then e5, supporting simply the space advantage that black has built here, because of course what white has here as a main strategical advantage is of course the long diagonal of the light square bishop, and black is of course a very powerful and dominant centralized pawn. So white has lost a little bit of battery in the center, but has now of course the activity on this long diagonal. So here in the continuation we have knight to f3, we have now this idea knight to c6. You can also play c5 immediately. This would be now really a reversed Benoni structure. Now I think e3 would happen, then something like knight to f6, here probably e takes d4, and after c takes d4 you see after move d3 I think this will be a perfect reverse Benoni structure. So here after move knight to f3, Magnus decided to support the pawn further without playing the move c5. He simply developed the minor piece. So here we have castling bishop to c5. We have now d3 here by Nepo, and now after move knight to f6, here knight from b to d2. And there are many games in this particular line. What I would probably here do from white's perspective, of course Nepo is a much stronger player than I am, but I would bring probably here my bishop out, because I simply don't like here the dark square diagonal. Although you see with the move knight from b to d2 and then with knight to b3 you can maybe kick away this this bishop from c5, but this bishop on c5 is a weak piece anyway in my opinion. This this bishop on c5 is a little bit blocked out by its own pawn. Of course in the near future we can maybe expect some e4 e5 e4 ideas, so that's why I would maybe even try here bishop to g5, undermine the pressure a little bit, go into positional setups here, and then after move knight to d2 I could have a great control of the e4 squares. But that's just me. As I said, I would try it out. I'm not sure if that's the best way here to proceed, but as I said, here Nepo blocks first his dark square bishop out. Here after move a5 we have knight to b3. Okay, you have now kicked away the bishop, and now finally what Nepo had in mind was this idea, because we don't want to tolerate of course here the space advantage that black has built here. So that's why the move e3 is always a positional preparation to finally challenge white here, black here in the center of the board. So we have now d takes e3. If you play e5 in order to support your pawn, that's in my opinion not so good. Then e takes d4. After e takes d4 then you see rook to e1 can happen, and now I think black would lose a little bit the battle on the e5. The problem is now you cannot even kick away the knight from this weird square on b3, because then the knight comes very active into the game. So you have to castle, then of course white is dominant on the e file. So that's why here Magnus didn't play the move e5, he played simply d takes e3, inviting here Nepo's bishop into the game after move bishop to e3. We have now knight to g4, and you see now the bishop becomes basically the main target here. You can also play maybe some occasions to move d4. If knight takes e3 happens, then f takes e3. You could have then maybe here a powerful pawn chain in the center of the board. Then the pawns are marching with some ideas like e4, then d5. Maybe a white could have a dominant position, as I said, and simply push the pawns in the center. But here after move knight to g4, Nepo decides to trade off the bishops, bishop to c5, because the dark square bishop really of whites wasn't really a good piece. We have to really say it. This light square bishop is much better. When we watch now Magnus' position, Magnus has here a little bit of a bad bishop on c8, which is blocked out temporarily by its own pawn, and the problem is that the bishop on c8 is a little bit blocked out also on this diagonal, and the bishop is always stuck to the defense of the b7 pawn. So that's why we can understand, I think, here Nepo's choice. So far a great technique in the opening, bishop to c5, trading off bad bishop sort of for Magnus Carlsen's good bishop was, I think, so far a good plan here. So here Magnus Carlsen calculates. We have now d4, we have now a4 by Magnus, and now after bishop to e7, queen to e7, now you see Nepo found a brilliant opportunity for the knight. Now the knight is attacking here the b7 square, but also when this long diagonal for the light square bishop will be open, then of course with the support of the knight, with the support of the rook, of course here I think white has really a pleasant game. It's not so easy, I think, here for Magnus Carlsen to play now the game, because still you have these worries where to go with your light square bishop. Still you have some worries because these two pawns are connected, and maybe in the near future white can use also the d5 pawn breakthrough as a motif in order to even further mess up here the position, in order further maybe to open the position. But you have to prepare, I think, this move with rook to e1, and then maybe d5 could be a realistic opportunity. First, of course, you have to go somewhere with your knight, but as I said, d5 is also maybe as a long-term tactic a nice plan here for white. So here in the continuation, Magnus plays now, well, it was, I think, maybe his first inaccuracy, because it's really an unnecessary move. Here e5 would be, I think, slightly better, because e5 is of course kicking away this pawn. This pawn is the key defender of the knight on c5. So now I think Magnus Carlsen had a great chance to simplify the game here. I think it was a brilliant opportunity for the world champion, and not that you're also attacking the knight on c5, you're also liberating your light square diagonal for the light square bishop. So that's why I think this was now a great chance for the world champion to come somehow into the game. Now after something like rook to e1, that would be a must move for white. Black could also counterattack with rook to e8. You see, now we have a great tension on the e file. We have also great tension on the d file. No one can take, because no one can take in the center of the board, because you lose the queen. So here maybe knight to a4 can happen. You can maybe take out the pawn, but it would be only a temporary loss of the pawn, because after queen to b4 now Magnus would have a counterattack. I'm not sure if Magnus saw this line, if Magnus calculated everything. Now after b3 here, of course, Nepo can also Nepo will also lose the pawn on d4, so it's now an equal game for both sides. I think in this particular line Magnus would solve, as I said, simply his position problems. But Magnus went into wild line a3. Probably when you start to push like Magnus a5, a4, a3, you want to get your rook somewhere into the game. This a file attacks, or maybe h file attacks, are many times in order to bring your rook into the game. I think Magnus calculated this one, because after rook to a5, maybe he could get finally out of this long diagonal, out of this tactical mess that can happen on the long light square diagonal, because if that diagonal opens, then the rook becomes an object of tactic. Okay, here a3, as I said, maybe not the best of moves here by the world champion. Here in the continuation, Nepo simply takes. He plays b takes a3. We have now rook to d8 by Magnus, and now knight to b3, protecting simply here the d5 d4 weakness. If you play, you see something like rook to e1 in order maybe to spice up the game on the e file, like we have seen. Maybe there are some tactical opportunities on the e file. This wouldn't be good because here of this tactic, knight to d4 can happen. You see now everything is pretty much messed up, because also the knight is hanging on c5. So here black would gain too much of material. Black is much better here. Maybe white could try knight to b3, b7 in order somehow to get the pawn back, but now there is a brilliant tactic. Knight to f2 is a serious threat, so that's why here after maybe king to f2, bishop to b7, and here white is simply tactical loss. You can maybe try knight to d4, but here queen to c5 would paralyze basically everything. It's game over here for white. So that's why you have to be careful. You see, Magnus played also really tricky ideas. That's why Nepo, for instance, you can really be lost immediately after potential rook to e1. So that's why Nepo's choice was much better. Knight to b3, retreating first with the knight, and then of course controlling the d4 square further. So here in the continuation, knight to f6 played by Magnus. He realizes that he could also be vulnerable a little bit by some tactics, because the knight on g4 was a little bit loose, and then when the knight moves, then of course also the knight on g4 is hanging. So that's why knight to f6, so far a good idea by the world champion, regrouping, getting the pieces back on natural squares. We have rook to e1, and now Magnus simply takes queen takes a1. The material is equal, but I still kind of like more white's position because of this flexible pawn structure in the center of the board. These are flexible pawns, they are mobile, they can be used in order maybe to attack further the position. Finally, the pawn structure is not symmetrical anymore. That's the beauty of this position, although the engine gives here equal chances for both sides. But I simply like here the pawn mobility, the potential aggressive methods that you can play here in the center of the board. So that's why finally it was sort of a Nepo that we wanted to see in this particular game. So queen to a3, we have queen to e2 by Nepo, h6 by Magnus Carlsen, creating some breathing spaces, and now h4. We have bishop to d7. Here Magnus finally has to develop the lies for the bishop, because it cannot be tolerated, of course, that you are playing the whole game without one piece. Now finally Nepo gets his attack, knight to e5, and liberates finally also this diagonal and attacks the weak b7 square. So here in the continuation we have bishop to e8. The problem is, I think now, if you try knight to c6, maybe bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, b takes c6, leads now into simplified game, and that's why Nepo really didn't want to play that. He knows that he's 2 points down in this super match, so he has to win the game. So that's why we can understand why he simply didn't trade off more pieces, although probably this would be in a practical way maybe easier to play for white, because you have this distant pass pawn. Here what we want to do is of course simply push it, and the problem in the potential endgame is that the knights don't play so very well against this distant path pawns, especially on this pawn, against these pawns that are on the edge of the board. So that's why maybe in this scenario, maybe, I don't know, white could maybe hope for a better endgame, but Nepo didn't want to play such a simplified line, tried to spice up the game. After move bishop to e8, he tried queen to e3. Here we have queen to b4, we have rook to b1. Finally, Nepo gets both of these rooks very active, and he's again targeting the weak b7 square. So here in the continuation we have now knight to e5. If you try, for instance, queen to e7 now to get out of the mess, then maybe it would be possible. Bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, knight takes e6, b6, c6. Now the queen is not on a3 anymore, so now the queen is not blocking this potential progress of the a pawn. So maybe it will be time now to make something out. Now knight to c5 also is tempting. It's, I think, a good square here for this white knight. So as I said, maybe this will be a line. I'm not sure. As I said, the engine gives here equal chances for both sides, but from a practical point of view, I think this would be a beautiful endgame maybe to play here for white. So here after move rook to b1, Magnus Carlsen simply takes knight takes e5. We have d takes e5, kicking away the knight. Knight to g4. We have queen to e1, attacking the queen, and after queen to e1, rook to e1, the game becomes now more and more simplified. But we have to again say it with a slight advantage here for white, especially because of this b7 weakness. Now knight to c5 can be also useful in order to attack the position. So first Magnus plays, I think, the correct move. He plays h5, fixing the knight, because there is always the trap with f3. The knight could be endangered here, then you don't have any more squares to escape. And after move h5, here Magnus Carlsen lost the pawn on b7, but it's only temporarily, because here after move rook to a4, Magnus could of course attack the pawn on c4, and now what white should probably do is to play here the move f3, then black has to retreat, knight to h6. Still you have time here from white's perspective to play the move bishop to e4. This wasn't played in the game, but I wanted to show you what would be a possible continuation. And after move bishop to e4, now knight to f5 is probably the best move here, attacking simply the g3 weakness. After something like rook to d1, we have rook to d1, rook to d1, and now after king to f8, probably in the near future, black will also grab one pawn here on c4 or this pawn on a2, and probably this game should probably end in a draw because the material would be equal. But what Nepo did after move rook to a4, he didn't play the move f3, he played now huge blunder. Again a blunder here by Nepo. He played now the move c5. Really wild stuff. I'm not sure. The problem about this move c5 is that you getting your bishop locked. The bishop is now paralyzed. The bishop doesn't have any squares to escape. You see now in the next couple of moves the bishop will get attacked and there's nothing that can be done. This c6 is paralyzing the bishop's activity, so it's game over. Believe me or not, the engine gives you already a plus 2.5 evaluation for black. Again, Nepo made a blunder like in the game 8. It was too much here to handle, I think, the pressure in this super match. Now after move c6, you see finally Nepo tried this move after it, but it's simply too late. The bishop is trapped here. We have rook to e4, we have rook to a7 attacking the bishop, we have rook to b4, but now see this other rook attacks the bishop. You cannot protect it anymore. We have a4, we have rook takes b7, rook to b6, we have rook takes b6, we have c takes b6, and after here knight rook takes b6, knight to c5. This was at least some kind of an idea here by Nepo to paralyze further the pieces, because he needed now the knight into the game. Okay, he has this distant pass pawn. Magnus Carlsen's knight is also too far away from the action, but it's simply too late. As I said, this is completely winning for the world champion. Knight to f5. Here we have a5 by Nepo, rook to b8, we have a6, and now Magnus shows that he's understanding the position very well. Took simply pawn, because here after knight to a4 that Nepo played, the idea is clear. Nepo wants to play here the move a7, and then when the rook moves maybe to a8, he wants to play maybe then knight to b6, and then of course he was trying to promote. But Magnus Carlsen is not allowing that scenario, because here after move c5 a7 happened, but here with the rook to d8 we are not allowing any tempi, because if you play for instance rook to a8, then you get of course knight to b6, and then probably white is winning the game. So that's why rook to d8, good idea here by Magnus. After knight to c5, here rook to a8 was played, and in this position Nepo resigned. So what to say, I'm a little bit sorry that Nepo blundered too many times in this World Chess Championship match. He played finally today really great opening. I think he found different ways to try to attack Magnus Carlsen. I think that's the way how he should have played in the first place. We have seen that in this particular game this imbalanced pawn structure caused, I think, slightly positional problems for the world champion, but Magnus is really Magnus. Magnus plays always this middle game is almost like a top engine. So I think we can understand Nepo's frustrations, but he's basically the one to blame. He made now too many inaccuracies, mistakes and blunders against the world champion. This is simply too much in such an important match. I'm sure that Nepo will come back. He will probably stay at the top level, but I think simply that this World Chess Championship match after this one is simply over, because there are only now 5 more games to play, and Nepo needs 3 wins out of the 5 next games. In my opinion, mission impossible. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Really wild stuff. If you want to follow our coverage so far of the super event, check out my previous analysis of some more games that we have analyzed. Really wild things happens in this super event between Magnus Carlsen and Nepomniachtchi. Here's the link of our playlist of the World Chess Championship in 2021. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.